Hello, and welcome to the Washington Monthly. I'm your host, Ann Kim.
And I'm your co-host, Garrett Epps.
In this episode, the decline and fall of the U.S. Senate.
I think the tragedy here is that the Senate is, ground zero for America's political dysfunction.
Our guest is Ira Shapiro, the author of 3 books on the history of the Senate. His latest book is called The Betrayal: How Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans Abandoned America. Ira has also been an occasional contributor to the Washington Monthly. Welcome, Ira. It's great to have you.
And it's wonderful to be with you and Garrett, two people whose writings and thinkings meant so much to me.
You're very kind, Ira.
Yes.
Well, I want to start by giving listeners a little bit more background on you. You are a lawyer who worked as a senior staffer for some truly legendary figures in the Senate. People like Jacob Javits, Tom Eagleton, Jay Rockefeller. You also worked in the Clinton administration as the chief trade negotiator for Japan. I guess actually we should be calling you Ambassador Shapiro, right? And you've had this just incredibly successful career as a lawyer, working in international trade as well. But you've also written 3 books on the history of the modern Senate, one of which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and which critics have called this epic trilogy, or we may consider it kind of an epic tragedy about the Senate's decline. Now, the last of these books you published in 2022, and it was titled Betrayal: How Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans Abandoned America. But that was published before the election of Donald Trump. So my first question to you is, given the harsh title of that 3rd book, how do you characterize the U.S. Senate now?
And thanks for asking. I've probably spent more time thinking about the Senate than any reasonable person should. I actually got to work there 50 years ago this year. I guess I got there before Chuck Grassley and Mitch McConnell when he got elected. So, look, I think the tragedy here is that the Senate is, ground zero for America's political dysfunction. The Senate was the place where the hard issues had to get worked out. It was our national mediator, according to Walter Mondale. It brought people from all over the country together. It brought the 2 parties together to try to solve problems. But when the Senate started to fail, and it started to fail a long time ago, even 30 years ago, it started its decline, then those problems were not being solved. And indeed, the public saw the partisanship and division essentially highlighted at the highest level of government. So I think the Senate's failure has cost us a lot. My last book was actually written after Trump had served 1 term, but after McConnell had failed to stop Trump in the 2nd impeachment trial, which is, I think, so far their legacy.
Well, you put a lot of blame on McConnell, and I wonder if you would like to size up his impact on the institution from beginning to end. He's on the way out now. He's resigned the majority leadership, but I think it's probably safe to say he's the most influential majority leader since Lyndon Johnson. How, if you had to summarize his effect on the Senate and on the United States, what would you say?
It's a great question, and it often comes up this way, Garrett. I would say that McConnell's impact is unprecedented. It far exceeds anything that Johnson did in the Senate. McConnell was there longer, and he had more profound impact on all 3 branches of government. Unfortunately, I think his impact was quite negative. If you look at the decline of the Senate, it correlates quite sharply with McConnell's time as leader. It became, I would say, before McConnell and Harry Reid, you saw leaders trying to overcome the centrifugal forces of our politics. The parties were drifting further apart for good reasons. The Senate was a place to try to bring it back together, where the leaders had to work together. McConnell and Reid, but particularly McConnell, abandoned that approach and simply became partisan warriors. So, what's his legacy? His legacy is a very diminished Senate, and he's likely to be measured on two counts. One, the thing he did, which was create an extreme Supreme Court, supermajority.
Yes.
And the other, the thing he didn't do, which was stop Donald Trump, even though he detested him and knew the danger and knew the damage.
Now, you mentioned those two critical decisions that McConnell has made. Are there other decisions that he also made earlier on in his tenure that set up, that you think you also see as turning points in
Oh,
the decline of the
he's
Senate?
I think he made countless decisions that were awful for the country. McConnell is the single strongest opponent of any kind of campaign finance regulation. So McConnell's legacy, along with Garrett, the Supreme Courts in Citizens United, McConnell's legacy is a system of dark money, incredible cost, billionaires freely influencing the political system. McConnell was the leading opponent of any kind of work on environmental protection and climate change. McConnell tried to defeat the Affordable Care Act back in 2009. And then, after it was law, he waged a long fight to try to repeal it without. So it's hard to overstate his damage in all aspects of American society.
He was one of the four Republicans who voted in favor of the Tim Kaine resolution trying to block the tariffs. Does that indicate some rethinking or repentance on his part?
I think he's cast a number of useful votes since his decision not to run again as leader and then to retire. Um, and I think he's voting his conscience on certain things. But I also believe that I suspect that his deal, spoken or unspoken, with John Thune, the majority leader, is I'm going to cast some votes that I care about, but I won't influence anybody, basically. I like to give McConnell credit for everything he does for the nation. It just never takes very many pages. The one thing I give him,
Sorry.
I, I give him a great deal of credit for steadfast leadership on Ukraine. I think
Hmm.
he's been very strong. He's been acting on principle. He was consistent on that. I respect him for that. But at the same time, that doesn't stop him from supporting a president who would switch sides on the war. So, no, I think McConnell's legacy is going to be a dark one.
Hmm. What do you think motivated McConnell, all these years? I mean, it's kind of hard to argue that he's an institutionalist because the result has been that the institution has been utterly destroyed. So, what in your research did you find was the driving force behind, the way he's acted over the past several decades?
I think I think basically power, mostly power for himself and
Hmm.
power for the Republican Party. I mean, there's no doubt that McConnell's long tenure reflects the fact that he was a good Republican leader. He he did the things that the donor base of the Republican Party wanted him to do. They contributed the money. He helped produce the legislative and regulatory results they wanted. His his caucus always respected him because they knew how good he was politically. So but it's been power. And I think one of the people wrote a very good one line description about McConnell and the name will come to me in a moment since I'm a little old, but basically she wrote that ultimately his partisanship overwhelmed his patriotism.
Ira, I have to ask. It's slightly a segue, but we have another Senate leader who cries out for assessment, and in fact is in the New York Times today explaining once again that he's right about everything. How do you assess the performance of uh, Senator Schumer as majority and then minority leader?
I have a lot of respect for Senator Schumer's 8 years, now in his ninth year, as leader. I think he had the extraordinary challenge of Trump's first term and then became majority leader with Biden. And there's a lot of accomplishments that he's made. He works he's inexhaustible, and he has held his caucus together for the most part. I think at this point he is taking a lot of criticism, some of which is justified, for having difficulty adjusting to the challenge of Trump too. Um, I think it was a close question as to what he should have done with respect to the issue that divided the Democrats
Mm.
and has caused him to be criticized. I think generally Schumer has been an effective and successful leader in a difficult time. I also think that the Schumer, Durbin, Patty Murray team is three excellent public servants who have been around a little too long.
Mm. Is there more that is there more that Senate Democrats should be doing? You think? Are there tools that they have not been using that they should be using? I mean, what can they do in the minority at this point?
Well, I think they have to use every tool they have, and that means filibustering certain things. It also means being much more public and vocal about their opposition to things that Trump is doing. But of course, Anne, I agree with you that it's a challenge to be in the minority. Um, but I do think the Republican minorities always manage to do a lot of obstructing, and the Democrats ought to get better at it.
Mhm. What exactly does that look like then? You think should there be more of the kind of thing that Cory Booker did with his epic 25-hour speech, or what else holds?
Well,
What do you see
I
happening?
think Cory Booker did a great job in that epic speech. I think it also takes the form of hearings, not formal hearings, but some of the things
Mm.
the House has been trying to do, where you pick issues and you hold hearings or you hold meetings and you highlight those issues. I think it does sometimes require making the leadership of the Senate exhaust itself to get anything done, whether it's through filibusters, holds, etc. Um, I think that basically, and I think they should be essentially recognizing that Trump too is not in the realm of politics as usual. That this is essentially an effort by the Trump to turn us into some kind of American version of authoritarianism. And accordingly, you have to be much stronger in your opposition.
On that note, I am curious, not just about the Democrats, but the Senate, the Republican majority has been pretty acquiescent in some things that even they, in essence, admitted were unacceptable, such as the Hegseth nomination, which was just mystifying to watch as the needle moved from reject to a tie and acceptance. Um, I have heard it suggested by people less ignorant than I that some of what's going on is literally just physical fear on the part of Republican senators for themselves and their families. In other words, not just fear of a Musk financed primary, but literally fear of the growing tendency to political violence. Do you have any assessment of that?
Well, unfortunately, I think that's true. I think Lisa Murkowski said so recently. She's been the most independent of the Republicans, but she said she was was fearful for her safety. Mitt
Hmm.
Romney said the same thing in the biography that was written about him. He made the point in the first impeachment trial, he was appalled by the Republican senators playing politics. In the second impeachment trial, he felt they were worried about their personal security and the security of their families. Look, anybody who speaks out against Trump uh, is running some risks, whether it's investigation, prosecution, harassment, or the potential of some kind of violence. My answer to that is essentially safety in numbers, collective security. The
Yes.
more people that do it, the more institutions that stand up, the stronger the opposition, but also the safer the individuals.
Hmm. Now, on this point about opposition, you've been writing a lot about the need to impeach Trump. And what are you doing on that score to try to make that happen? And what's your assessment of what it will take for that to happen?
My, well, my efforts, I've written a couple of times, including once before the tariffs, that what Trump had done in the first 70 days was such an assault on our democracy, such an attack on our checks and balances and all of our institutions, that it richly warranted impeachment and removal, number one. And number two, it was the only thing that would change the situation. We made a terrible decision as a country to return Trump to office. And when people realize that, they need to rectify it by recalling him. So, how's that working out? The general answer is not going to happen. My response, and that's because the Republicans are still with him. My response is you have to recognize the damage, you have to recognize the remedy, and then you have to work to change the politics. And the politics are changing. You already have the polls show it, the demonstrations show it. The tariffs were a crucial blow to Trump's secure base. People are turning against Trump. They realize that this isn't what they signed up for. And at a certain point, the Republicans who are slavishly loyal to Trump but secretly know that this is a disaster, they will find that they have the political support to be stronger. I was saying to my wife today, it's 14 months until we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country. You can celebrate it or mark it by tanks in the street for one of Trump's military parades, or we can really celebrate it by having thrown him out of office and having restored our democracy. So I would opt for the latter.
I think we all would at this point.
But I don't think it's unattainable. I think the Senate Republican senators who have shown no character or courage are aware, a of that this is extraordinary damage to the country, and are hearing from their constituents. They will hear from their constituents, whether it's the tariffs, Social Security and Medicaid, or the fact that actually their constituents believe that we shouldn't destroy our ability to do medical research, shouldn't attack our universities, which were crown jewels. Their constituents even believe we should be doing something for the poorest people in the world. They weren't in favor of destroying AID. So it's a matter of putting it, people will be vocalizing their opposition, and ultimately, Ann and Garrett, in my view, ultimately the Congress has to be sort of the judge of whether this is an acceptable situation or whether it needs to be remedied with the remedy that the founders gave us. Garrett has written wonderfully about the courts. I'm a lawyer. I believe in the courts. I think many of these lawsuits are necessary and superbly done. I don't think that's how you stop Trump. I think ultimately you stop Trump and stop this damage by removing him from office.
Your book said how the Senate can save itself in America. Can it, and what could be happening now that would build toward that outcome? I quite agree with you about the courts. They can do a lot. They can kind of bring us to the threshold of something, but they can't move us over it. What could be happening now that will let the Senate redeem itself?
Well, I had it. I started in 2017 or 18 with my second book, and then I wrote more about it in my third book. I think there are things the Senate could do that would make it function better. I think the confirmation process should have been fixed long ago, and I've put forth ideas for how to do that. There should be fewer Senate confirmed nominees, and there should be guaranteed votes on certain positions within a time certain. There are things that can be done. Ultimately,
Mhm.
however, we're past that point. The Senate redeems itself only by playing a positive role in dealing with the crisis we face. They will be judged. They will be judged. History will judge them on one thing and one thing alone. Did they stop Donald Trump, or did they stand by and allow our democracy to be dismantled? And, 50 years in politics, and I'm now down to simplifying things. It's not that complicated. That's sort of their choice at certain point.
Now, Ira, you mentioned a few minutes ago the need for generational change, and it's happening, right? Senator Dick Durbin
Yes.
of Illinois is currently the number two in the Senate leadership behind Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, has announced that he's retiring after 44 years in the Senate. He's 80 years old. How do you assess his legacy, and do you have a favorite pick for who should be his successor in the Senate leadership?
I think he's had a wonderful legacy. I think Dick Durbin is a great public servant. I think if only for the fact that he got rid of smoking on airplanes decades ago, that in itself is a wonderful legacy.
Yeah.
But he's been a great champion of trying to get comprehensive immigration reform to help the dreamers. He's been a strong leader on a whole range of things, and I greatly admire his work and his character. And I admire the fact that he acknowledges that it's time to go in the same way that others this year have. And Ben Cardin last year, and earlier this year, Gary Peters and Gene Shaheen. I think Tina Smith, two of them only in their 60s and decided it was time to go. Generational change is occurring. I don't have any one favorite, Anne. I think I would love to see a leadership team that maybe included Amy Klobuchar, who's not that young, Raphael Warnock, who I think would be superb.
Yes.
I think Chris Murphy or Brian Schatz would be wonderful. But we've got a whole list of people that are coming in. Andy Kim is very promising. We've got people in their 40s and 50s who are stepping up, even have a couple in their 30s. So I feel good about the people that are coming into the Senate. I think we will not overcome the terrible divisions in the country until we get
Mm-hmm.
beyond Trump.
Now, the map doesn't look great necessarily for Senate Democrats in 2026, but let's assume for the moment that there is a real blue wave, as is historically the case often in midterms, and Democrats regain the majority in the Senate. What is the first thing that they should do when the Congress opens in 2027?
Well, that's a hard question. I think the first thing they should do in 2027 depends on how much they get done in 2026. If Trump is still in office, I think the first thing they should do is prepare to get the articles of impeachment from the House. I would do nothing else other than that. And I'm sorry to be fixated on this, Anne, but the truth is that other things, I mean, if you look at it, for instance, it's possible that the Congress is pushing back on Trump's tariff power, saying this wasn't a national emergency. You
Right.
shouldn't have declared that there was a national emergency. You don't have the unilateral power to raise tariffs. Well, if the legislation on that reached him, he'll just veto it. He'll go on doing what he's doing. And you go down the list, you see the same thing in all areas. Now, it is possible, let's say enough senators and members of Congress understand that their constituencies won't tolerate a massive cut in Medicaid benefits. I could see that might not happen, and that they'll find some way to fake the numbers and fake the tax cuts, whatever, in the budget. But it won't change, and that's a good thing, but it won't change the fundamental challenge.
Thank you, Ira, very much for joining us today. And
Fantastic.
Well, thank you
we'll,
for having me, Anne. And Garrett, I really appreciate it.
all right, everyone, take care.
Thank you both.
That's it for this week from the Washington Monthly. I'm Ann Kim, and on behalf of my co-host, Garrett Epps, thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to our channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a wonderful week.